Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Crees and animals. It was in the dissertation in the book and quite a lot of conference papers. I got very excited about beavers, and then I got quite excited about wolverines. Interesting stuff to read on these things. People that really know their animals' characteristics very well. One of the ones that I published is on the relationship between the Crees and geese. And I don't know as much about geese. I know something about them. The female goose is monogamous. The male apparently is only something of a monogamous mate. But that's unusual in the animal kingdom. And the cooperation, collaboration between not just the mates, but also the flock. And I got onto this when I was reading The Once and Future King by, I think it's T.H. White, I'm not sure, where he has Arthur, to become king later, as a boy, go off and Merlin goes off to live with the geese to learn community. And the geese operate as a community. You have geese that keep watch while the others feed. And the cooperation in their flying formations. You don't have one leader that stays in the front. You have a guy up front who flies up front for a little while, and then he drops back to the back. Somebody else takes the front. You know, they're not too rank ordered in that way. And watching a goose come in and land, to me, is an exciting thing. It's a very beautifully graceful thing to watch. And they're kind of dignified looking, too. And they are delicious. And a goose cooked over a open fire in a meatwop, hanging by a string from one of the poles up front and dripping into a grease pan just to one side of the fire, can be a very satisfying meal. So people celebrate geese by eating them, but they also celebrate geese by finding them exciting. My prof, John Honigman, once said that at Attawapiskat, people said that the arrival of the geese in the spring was the end of hunger. That the period of breakup meant that there was very restricted mobility and people were often starving. So geese are important beyond just being able to go down to your local supermarket and buy some goose. And that extends to a kind of excitement about the goose hunt. Hunting geese is an exciting event. It's in the film, The Cree of Paint Hills, that I was involved in, showing people going out, the goose blinds and so on. But I can remember traveling from East Maine down to Waskaganish by canoe, and we stopped overnight at Boatswain Bay, and I saw some geese flying. These were flying south. It was getting late in the summer. So I commented to Willie, "Oh, there's some geese." And he looked up and he said, "Jesus," as if, oh man. You know, this was not just your ordinary acknowledgement. This was enthusiasm. Geese are exciting. Geese are admirable. Geese are intelligent. Geese are reliable. They keep coming back. They leave, but they come back. Unlike Southerners who leave after saying, gee, this is great, I can't stand life in the city, and then they never come back, and people wonder. I was told that. And actually, I was told that I was the only one that came back. And, yeah, people find things that they like in a small community, but they also find that there's no such thing as privacy, and that the expectations on you are sometimes a bit much to carry. Unlike living in an apartment or a condo or a house where you can pretty much go in and shut the door and not worry about that. So geese, more than anything, it's their mobility. They don't starve because they fly. And they head south, and then, dependably, just like the sun coming up, they come back. So geese have something that humans don't have. The freedom of movement. When some guy is down there pulling a toboggan and his wife is behind him pulling another toboggan, and he's getting pretty tired breaking trail, and he thinks about the geese. They just sail over on their way. Young geese are also delicious. We were traveling. We went up one of the very large rivers there, the Nottoway River, named after the Iroquois that used to come up and raid up there, Nottoway. And we'd gone to the third rapids. Gachagasic means there's ice here a long time. It's something about the rapids that causes a buildup, 12, 15 feet sometimes of ice. We were setting our nets for sturgeon, and you could chop a hole in the ice and put the sturgeon in there and keep them till we came back. On the way back, we passed some geese that had not yet developed their feathers. Pulled into the island, grabbed a stick, and went off and beat some baby geese about the head. And they went into a pot, and they were delicious. No pet names there. Not really a sense of guilt. People do feel a sense of regret at having to take a life in order to live well. And it is a source of some thought, some pondering. Story about a man that killed a polar bear. From a man named Charlie Kanatawat, now long dead. Lived in Fort George. And he had an odd dream. This is about animals. Okay? And in the dream, his wife died. Very troubling dream, very vivid. And a few days later, he was out hunting with his son, and they found the tracks of a bear, but they were big. They were polar or white bear tracks. And there was a cub and a mother, I guess. One big, one small. The son went after the small one, but Charlie went after the big one. And eventually he caught up to her. And he shot her, and she just sat down and looked at him. So he went up close for a final shot, and he said, all of a sudden, I felt sorry for her. Then he killed the bear. And then he said, when my wife died, my dream came back to me. Now, what are we to make of that? I don't know. He recollected his dream when she died. What connection he made beyond that, I have no idea. That actually, Charlie's story is in the Cree narrative book. But it tells you something about the attitude towards animals. You know, you can feel sorry for somebody you're going to kill. But hey, It's what humans do. And bears are to eat. And that's just the way it is. Okay, so we've got some geese, we've got white bear, caribou. You can sing to the caribou while you're snowshoeing after them. You want it not to be too cold because then the snowshoe frames will creak as you hurry along. You can't be quiet. You don't want the caribou to know that you're stalking them and approaching them and going to kill some. On the other hand, you wouldn't have found their tracks in the first place if they hadn't been at some, I guess, spiritual level willing. So you sing. And you sing to the caribou. And as old George Head told me, another man no longer living, Fort George, who used to trap in near Lake Kaniapaskau, way inland, walk 100 kilometers to work kind of thing. A person who's never snowshoed after caribou could not understand this song. You've got to feel it viscerally, emotional dynamics again. It is a feeling you are expressing in this song, and you are expressing it to, in a prayerful way, some spiritual aspect of the caribou. They're not hard to kill once you get to them. They're not too dangerous, with a very few interesting exceptions. And you could be your own undoing, I guess. One case of one man who was a long time catching up with them, and when he did, it was getting dark. And so he skinned one out and rolled himself up in the caribou skin. It froze. It contracted. He couldn't get out. He froze. When they found him, his wife said, she thought maybe his musket had just exploded and killed him that way. Didn't expect that. But there's an object lesson in that, practical, a motto to the story. Mind your green hides. But caribou are delicious, and you can snare them. You can even snare moose. Takes a pretty big snare. And occasionally you can snare two with one snare, because the caribou like to travel almost slavishly on the same path. So if the front caribou gets caught in a snare, the second one will try to go by just as close to the first one as possible, and you can get an antler stuck in there and be trapped. So they're not brilliant. They are sort of, as I said earlier, the dumb blonde of the animal kingdom. They are also extremely important. There's a lot of meat on caribou, and there are a lot of caribou usually, and they are sort of predictable. People know where they are likely to find them at a particular time of year. So that's good. Bears are that way too. If you know where the bear dens, you don't kill him unless you're in need. But if you are in need, then you know where to find them. And they are delicious. Take it from me. Two kinds of grease. The clear kind from the marrow, and the applesauce-like kind from the bear fat. John told me about bear grease before I had the taste of it. And I was trying to show how appreciative I was of what he was saying, so I guess it's kind of like applesauce. And he thought for a while, and then he said, no, more like jam. When I finally got some, yes, it is sweet. It is more like jam, literally. Anyway, I wander. But bears are very important. Porcupine is starvation food. You don't kill them unless you really need to, because they're pretty easy to kill with a stick on the nose. And they don't go too far. Sturgeon is absolutely delicious. We got the sturgeon up the Nottoway, 5-inch mesh nets. They were good big sturgeon. I had the first caviar of my life, a pound of it for lunch. Boiled caviar. It looked like shotgun shot, but it was delicious. Very rich, very healthy food. And when the dams went in on the Matagami River and the Moose River Basin, they found sturgeon below the dams to have big heads and small bodies. It was a nutrient problem. And that was a part of changing from a healthy river to a polluted or unhealthy river. It's not just the chemicals in the water. It's the creatures in the water. And it's also the creatures that drink the water, including humans. So there are quite a few people now at Moose Factory that buy bottled water because of the dams. Okay, I'm running out of ideas about the animals. Oh, no, one more. A man buys a bear trap, good price, secondhand, sets the trap. When he goes back to check it some days later, he finds 2 bears in the trap. Astonishing. Takes them out. Later on, he sets the trap and again gets 2 bears. He sold the trap. Cheap. When you're monkeying around with that kind of power and you don't understand it, get away from it. It's like buying a Maserati, okay? If you're not up to it, stay out of it. And this was too much. Bears are said to dance around the trap before they step in it. I found that one hard to stomach. Then I thought, well, what do we mean by dance? Well, the old-timey Crees, in the meat swap, the women would get up and shuffle around in a circle. Now, take the meat swap away, take the women away, and put the bear. It shuffles around in a circle before it steps in. And that leads me to another really good one about animals. Anyway, the bear does dance around the trap, checking it out. And then maybe it'll step in. Fox. Want to trap a fox? Well, you take your bait, and then you mound up the snow, 12 or 15 or 16 inches high, flatten the top, put your trap on, set, no bait, put a little birch bark over that, a little snow over that, and then put the bait around the side of the mound. Go away, smiling to yourself. Fox comes along. That's pretty odd looking. A mound like that. Smells good. Very suspicious. Dances around the mound. Tries a piece of the bait. It's good. Eats the rest of the bait. Then the fox wonders where that food came from. And when a fox wants to ponder something, it likes to go to a little rise and sit down. Ha ha ha! That's true. I've got that on both sides of the bay. Okay? People don't regard it as extraordinary. I thought it was brilliant. Talk about emotional dynamics. The fox's emotions, the hunter's emotions, it's all there. And, okay. Moving right along.
Yes.
Okay, we did a little study of wildlife harvesting in the mid-90s. And we were asked to do this by Moose Cree. They had twigged on to Ontario Hydro wanting to enlarge their generating sites, and they were going to resist this. They formed the Moose River James Bay Coalition. And I had a grant at that time from Shirk, and wondered if there was something that we could do that would fit our proposal and the Crees' interests. They said, yeah, do a harvesting study. Show that harvesting of animals is still important in this region. So we did. Thanks to a Cree, Moose Factory Cree, John Turner, who at that time was chairman of the Cree Trappers Association, and a very intelligent, very nice man, and enabled us to do much better science than if we had not had a Cree in the field, seeing what was going on, and gathering information. First, we found that although people lived in towns, although the hunters did not regard themselves as full-time hunters because they also took jobs and only stayed in the bush for part of the time, if the protein that was killed on the west coast, starting with Moose Factory, Moosonee, and going up to Pewanak, if that protein were evenly distributed, it would cover all of the protein needs of all of the people for a year. Okay? That's a lot. It's about 35% of their income. If you give an income value that losing my words, equivalence between hamburger and moose, where the moose, I must say, comes out rather poorly, or chicken and goose. Again, very conservative pricing here. It was very important. What John did was to see, for instance, oh, that's too many moose for that area, and he would go and check it out. Well, sure enough, double reporting. Two guys would go out together to kill a moose. They would both acknowledge the moose as theirs when the guy came around questioning. Or, no, there's no ptarmigan over there. So he'd go and find out, oh, yeah, well, they were visiting relatives over at such and such a place where there's ptarmigan. And so basically, we would have had something methodologically beautiful, scientifically flawed. But John knew the animals, knew the hunting, locations, people, was on the ground checking this stuff out, and so we did better science because of it. So it was good. We did mapping of the area. What's the name of the mapping that uses multiple overlays, computer? No.
GPS?
Sorry?
GPS? GIS?
Yes, GIS. Geographic Information Services? Something, anyway. Yeah, we have GIS maps. You can go and see what the spring goose hunt was, what the moose hunt was, and so on and so on. Where people go. What locations are important. What locations are important at what time of year. Where will you find these people? They're not in their entire Ontario-sanctioned hunting territory. They're at this place at this time, at that place at that time. You have to be stupid not to be. Cree word for vegetarian, a lousy hunter. Okay? It's a joke. Anyway, so we found that traditional harvesting activities were still important in the mid-90s. That was important for several reasons, although, they wound up employing 50 scientists, I think, to do reports on all sorts of environmental things. And I was just one doing more or less social science or ethnographic criticisms of their documents. And when we were ready to table all this information, Hydro withdrew the case. All that stuff did not get made part of the official record. Instead, they withdrew their demand-supply plan. This was not purely cynical on their part, although certainly the timing may have been. It was because they discovered that the demand was diminishing steadily and significantly, and so it was no longer feasible to put millions and millions of dollars into expanding they did later. And did I talk about the settlement that they made with Moose Cree? Not sure. This was a part of the current project. And so I should do that. This fed into the assessment that I did with Fickret Berkus on the impacts of hydro starting in the 20s on the Cree economy cumulatively. And it was rejected flat out by hydro. But then much more recently, when they decided they had to go ahead, they did settle. And I thought I mentioned this, the $200 million settlement that they put into an interest in the profit from the generating. Okay, so this was a collaborative thing. It involved Peter George, the economist, Fickret Berkus, the ecologist, and Old Dick, the anthropologist, and John Turner, bless his heart, who made it good.